Ever since it came to power in 2014, the Narendra Modi government has completely transformed all sectors. In the overall tenure of the BJP government, the transformation of Indian foreign policy has stood out the most. The Ministry of External Affairs, headed by the External Affairs Minister, Dr. Subramaniam Jaishankar, is responsible for executing India's foreign policy. The G20 summit under Indian presidency has just been concluded, with India managing to achieve consensus on the New Delhi Declaration. It was not easy, but Indian diplomats managed to bring every country on the same page. To accomplish such a task in such turbulent times, it would not be too far-fetched to say that currently Indian diplomacy is literally perfect. However, it was not always like this. Let's look back and recollect some focal points which have led to the transformation of Indian foreign policy under PM Modi. Hello and welcome to the Pamphlet. If you remember, during the run-up to the 2014 general elections, the then BJP PM candidate and now current PM Narendra Modi had called for a strong foreign policy. The promise of assertive diplomacy was seen as a counter to the passive and non-responsive foreign policy of the UPA government in its previous tenures. Many questioned BJP and its prime ministerial candidate on foreign policy front, but few knew that even as the Gujarat CM, Narendra Modi made frequent visits to major Asian economies. After the NDA government came into power, with a thumping majority in Lok Sabha, it readily shifted gears in diplomacy. The Narendra Modi-led government evolved from the Look East policy to the Act East policy, which sought to improve relations with neighboring countries in South Asia to engage the extended neighborhood of Southeast Asia and the major global powers. The first point is connecting with South Asia. In a symbolic gesture, every state head of South Asian countries were invited to the oath ceremony of Narendra Modi in 2014, and he held bilateral discussions with them the other day. Notably, Indian PM Narendra Modi paid his first foreign visit to Bhutan after he was invited by King Jigme Khesar Namgyal Wangchuk and the former Prime Minister Shering Tobke. The visit was also important to check the recent rise in relations between China and Bhutan. The new Indian government was quick to recognize Bangladesh's enormous geostrategic importance in India's security paradigm. The then External Affairs Minister, late Sushma Swaraj, chose Dhaka for her first standalone foreign visit on June 2014, where she met her counterpart Abul Hassan Mahmood and also called on Bangladesh PM Sheikh Hasina. In his 2015 visit to Bangladesh, Indian PM Narendra Modi concluded as many as 22 agreements. India extended a $2 billion grid line to Bangladesh and pledged $5 billion in investments. Similarly, India emphasized strengthening diplomatic ties with its neighbors such as Myanmar, Sri Lanka, and Nepal. India has prioritized infra projects in the neighborhood countries while aiding them during an hour of crisis. For example, how India was quick to help Nepal during the 2015 earthquake or aiding Sri Lanka during the economic crisis in 2022. Pakistan was an exception in this initiative, even though initially India attempted to better its relations with Pakistan. Under Narendra Modi government, India developed a more aggressive and assertive diplomatic stance while dealing with matters related to Pakistan. After the Uri and Pulwama terror attacks, India not only responded with counter-military operations, but also with strict diplomacy aimed at alienating Pakistan globally. In the last 5 years, India has publicly denounced its neighbor for exporting terrorism in global forums such as the United Nations. India has maintained that Pakistan has to stop the cross-border terrorism to have any kind of talk. The second point is countering China. In the last decade, China has aggressively increased its global influence, resulting in territorial issues with many countries. Under its string of pearls policy, China has strengthened relations with major Asian powers, investing billions in establishing critical infra projects. Through its Belt and Road Initiative, China plans to enhance regional connectivity, although several countries, including India, have objected to the project. Indian analysts often have accused China of encircling its territories by establishing naval bases such as Hambantota and Gwadar in Sri Lanka and Pakistan respectively. After 2014, the Indian government has looked to counter China and its influence overseas. Against mighty China, India has stood firmly, whether it was on the border during the Galwan clash or allying with like-minded groups such as the Quad. Speaking of Quad, the member nations have played a major role in redefining the Asia-Pacific as Indo-Pacific to strengthen the trans-regional ties and deal more effectively with China's string of pearls. The next point is balancing between superpowers, and it is one of the most important points of the Indian diplomacy since 2014. One of the highlights of Indian diplomacy has been its balancing between Russia and the US. Since 2014, Indian PM Narendra Modi has made frequent visits to West, including several to the US, boosting defense and trade ties. However, India has chosen to not let go of its evergreen partnership with Russia. A fine example of the above mentioned fact was when India purchased the Russian S-400 air defense system despite pressure from the West to prefer US THAAD missile defense. It is also important that despite India buying the Russian equipment and arms, US waived India from the CAATSA, the sanctions aimed at countries dealing with adversaries of America. Another fine specimen of India's balancing between superpowers is its diplomatic conduct, as war in Ukraine was affecting the foreign policy of every nation. Since the beginning of Ukraine-Russia war, countries around the globe have struggled diplomatically in dealing with the conflict. Many nations uninvolved directly in the conflict were coerced by the Western alliance to criticize Moscow for what it termed as Russian aggression. Right from the start, India assumed a responsible position while understanding both sides and promoting dialogue as a solution to the problem. However, when the war was affecting the entire global economy and disrupting supply chains, Indian PM Narendra Modi did not hesitate to criticize Russian President Vladimir Putin for the conflict. India has abstained from voting or passing resolutions against Russia while providing humanitarian assistance and aid to Ukraine. The Narendra Modi government has adopted the policy of India First, which saw the country importing a record amount of cheap Russian crude oil when the West had sanctioned Moscow to impact its war-waging capacity. The next point is the leader of the global South. In the last 9 years, India has always provided unconditional support to anyone, be it providing relief during a calamity or providing COVID vaccines, especially countries in the global South. The Hindu philosophy of Vasudev Kutumbakam oozes out from the Indian foreign policy, which seemingly attracts the global South. Unlike China or America, India does not want oil or virtually take over the country with debt, but it instead provides opportunities to grow and develop hand to hand. An example of this was seen in a recent visit by PM Narendra Modi to Papua New Guinea, when PM James Marape not only touched the former's feet to take blessings, but also declared him as the leader of Global South on the next day. Also under the Indian presidency of the G20, the African Union has been included in the group, which further bolsters India's title as a leader of the Global South. It would not be an overstatement that since independence, the Indian foreign policy has been at its best. It's dynamic and multilateral. Through its diplomacy, the present government has not only won praises in the world, but also generated a sense of pride among Indians. It's also ironic considering that foreign policy was assumed to be one of the weakest points of PM Narendra Modi before 2014, and now it is considered the strongest aspect of his premiership. Thank you. If you like this video, kindly subscribe to our YouTube channel, and also do not forget to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.